1692 was a deadly year for Salem Village in colonial Massachusetts. The events that took place here, as well as in other parts of New England, will forever be regarded as one of our nation's most tarnished moments in history.
From June to September of 1692, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft. 27 were convicted. 19 men and women were hanged. One elderly man was pressed to death because he refused to stand trial, and dozens of others languished in a horrible jail.
What caused this travesty of justice? How could such a tightly knit community come to condemn neighbors they'd known almost all their lives? One major factor of the hysteria that led to the infamous Salem Witch Trials was the very foundation of Puritan society itself: religion.
Puritan society was based solely on religion. They had no concept of what today's generation knows as separation of church and state. Their religious codes and its strict rules and moral expectations infiltrated every aspect of their society. Puritans possessed a pre-Enlightenment mindset, meaning that they tended to explain things supernaturally. Everything from stumping one's toe to food rotting before it should could be read by the Puritans as a sign of God's wrath or punishment.
Along with their utter adherence to their religion came the roles of men and women within the Puritan society. According to the Holy Bible, men are expected to be the head and religious leader of their households. Puritans interpreted this to mean that a woman's place was to tend to the household chores and care for children. Children in Puritan society were expected to be seen and not heard. They were expected to obey any command or request that an adult administered. In essence, children, especially young girls, had almost no say-so within this rigid society. Perhaps this is what led the notorious afflicted girls to continue accusing their neighbors of witchcraft. Those types of accusations were taken very seriously and elevated the 7 girls to an unusual level of power that they would never otherwise achieve.
There were also several political and economic problems circulating that were a factor in the witch hysteria of colonial Salem, such as the revocation of the Massachusetts Bay Colony by Charles II. There had also been a recent and widespread outbreak of smallpox, and with hostile Indian tribes not far away, there was a constant fear of Indian attacks. All of these tribulations solidified the Puritans' belief that God was punishing them.
Village politics have also been thought to have fueled the Salem Witch Trials. Once the hysteria began, it became very clear that anyone accused would most certainly be imprisoned, if not hanged. Therefore, if someone wanted to buy a neighbor's land, but he could not, he might simply say that he suspected his neighbor of witchcraft. Once the victim had been taken to prison and convicted or confessed to witchcraft, the victim's land would be forfeited, and the greedy coveter would have won.
So exactly when did all this hysteria begin? It all seemed to start when the new minister, Reverend Samuel Parris's daughter, Betty, fell ill in the winter of 1692. She is said to have dashed about, dove under furniture, contorted in pain, experienced strange fits, and complained of fever.
Linda Caparel argued much later in a 1976 article in Science magazine that these symptoms could be the result of convulsive ergotism, a disease caused by eating rye that has been infected with a fungus called ergot. This fungus invades developing kernels of rye grain, especially under wet conditions which had existed at the time of the previous rye harvest in Salem. Convulsive ergotism causes violent fits, a crawling sensation of the skin, fever, vomiting, choking, and most interestingly, hallucinations.
Although these symptoms are similar to those of Betty, they were unheard of in the Puritan world of 1692. Doctors were influenced by a different source. Cotton Mather had recently published a book, Memorable Providences, that described the suspected witchcraft of an Irish washerwoman in Boston. Unfortunately, Betty's behavior in some ways mirrored those of the afflicted person described in Mather's widely read and discussed book. There was only one diagnosis then: witchcraft.
Curiously, other children of the village, including 11-year-old Ann Putnam, 17-year-old Mercy Lewis, and Mary Walcott, also fell ill and began exhibiting similar symptoms. With so many girls succumbing to these behaviors simultaneously, suspicions regarding devil possession began to form. At this diagnosis, a neighbor, Mary Sibley, proposed a form of counter-magic. She told Tituba to bake a rye cake using the urine of the afflicted victim and feed the cake to a dog. Dogs were believed to be used by witches as agents to carry out their devilish commands. It was believed that when the dog ate the cake, the witch cake as it was called, the witch would feel pain and cry out.
Tituba was the first to be accused of witchcraft. This is not surprising, seeing as how her Barbados heritage had, and still has, a mystical connotation. It is said that Barbados was the birthplace of voodoo and other forms of black magic. Unfortunately, her heritage as well as her participation in Sibley's counter-magic made Tituba the perfect scapegoat.
The so-called proof of Tituba's involvement with the devil was the background that Tituba had with some of the neighborhood girls. Occasionally, she'd been known to entertain the young girls with simple magic tricks that were completely harmless in her eyes. She had learned the tricks throughout her own upbringing in Barbados, and was probably unaware that the Puritans would view this as having signed your soul to Satan.
In addition to Betty Paris, there were 6 other girls in Salem Village who were afflicted at the height of the Salem Witch Hysteria. They included Ann Putnam, Mercy Lewis, Mary Walcott, Mary Warren, Rebecca Wilkins, and Abigail Williams. Why would these girls continue to speak out against their neighbors? Perhaps it was a newfound sense of power they felt at the notion that they were all of a sudden the most famous and talked about individuals in the village.
The girls' claims and accusations were taken extremely seriously. Since the Holy Bible mentions the abhorrence to witchcraft, Puritans could not in good faith believe that witches did not exist. They hold to one verse in particular. In Exodus 22:18, it is written, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Therefore, anyone that the girls accused were ordered to trial.
There were many trials. The biggest difference between a courtroom trial today and one in Puritan Massachusetts is that in 1692, judges considered spectral evidence as legitimate and tangible. Spectral evidence refers to an allegation that someone's specter or spirit had been sent out to harm another person. So basically, the witness could scream aloud in court and claim she had been scratched or bitten by the defendant's specter, and that was usually enough for a conviction.
As these trials, known collectively as the infamous Salem Witch Trials, progressed, 19 potentially innocent men and women were executed as witches.
At least 4 of the accused persons died in prison. The jail was a notoriously unsanitary place, and some, especially the sickly and the elderly, could not withstand the horrible conditions.
One older man, Giles Corey, was pressed to death for refusing to come to court to confirm or deny any accusations made against him. Although he suffered an immensely agonizing death for his choice, it was actually a very wise decision on his part. Because he could not be executed as a witch, the government could not seize his property. His property and other assets could be inherited by his family.
What finally put an end to this horrific stage of American history? By early autumn of 1692, Salem's lust for blood was ebbing. Doubts had begun to form as to how so many respectable people of the village could be guilty. In fact, Reverend John Hale said, "It cannot be imagined that in a place of so much knowledge, so many, and so small a compass of land should abominably leap into the devil's lap at once."
The event that probably ended the executions for good, however, was that Massachusetts Governor William Phips ordered the court to exclude spectral evidence and touching tests, and to require any proof of guilt by clear and physical evidence. The last of the witch trials was held in January of 1693, and in May of the same year, Governor Phipps pardoned the remaining accused.
Today, anyone who travels to Salem, Massachusetts can see the actual resting places of the Hysteria victims. We must never forget the unprecedented injustice suffered by those of our Puritan ancestors. The Salem Witch Trials serve as a haunting reminder that a society ruled by suspicion and hysteria can lead only to utter ruin.